Hello, everybody. Hello. I guess we'll get one of the mics to work for me. I'm David McIntosh, president of the Club for Growth. Welcome to our first of the series of national forums on school choice. I want to thank everybody here at the New Hampshire State Bank Theater. They've done a great job of helping us get set up. And it's really great to be in Concord. You know, all of you from the Granite State, thank you. You're such welcoming folks to bring us here. We've got an exciting program that I can't wait to present to you. Club for Growth is the largest, leading basically national organization to fight for economic growth, limited government, and freedom. And this is the first of a series of several forums where we're going to be presenting the case for school choice across America. Last year with COVID, school shutdowns left so many students and so many parents really stranded. That episode opened their eyes to the fact that too often politicians and bureaucrats care more about their interests than they do about making sure that every student has the best possible education. So we're partnering with former Trump Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos and other conservatives like Mike Pompeo to capitalize on this moment and present the unique ability of school choice to lift our students and give them great opportunities for a fantastic education. It's frankly a structural solution to many of the problems we've been seeing. So without further ado, I want to bring forward our first guest. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos is a leader, an innovator, you might even say a disruptor, and a champion for freedom in education. For more than 3 decades, Betsy DeVos has fought tirelessly to get government out of the way, to allow students and parents the freedom and flexibility and the resources and support they need so they can choose where, when, and how they learn. Without further ado, let me bring Betsy DeVos.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much, and thank you so much, David and Club for Growth, for hosting this forum, for providing this opportunity to talk about this really important subject. I want to thank former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Mike, we really, really appreciate your being here today to discuss this as well. And to our many distinguished guests, most especially I want to have a little shout out to Frank Edelblue, who is the Education Commissioner here in New Hampshire, done a tremendous job. And thank you to all of you for being here today, for the interest you have in education, in our children's futures. Today, more than ever, is an important moment for the future of education, and particularly the future of K-12 education. You know, this last year has really laid bare many of the problems that many families have experienced in a whole new way. And the forces of the status quo, the union bosses and all of their allies and bureaucrats that support everything about the status quo have, I think, overstepped and overreached, and now is an important moment to really introduce policies that are going to empower families and kids to find their right fit for education. And so we thank you for being here today to talk about this important subject with us, and I look forward to that conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Betsy. I want to now bring forward our next speaker. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo served under the Trump administration in that position and also as director of the CIA. He was elected to 4 terms in Congress from the Kansas 4th District prior to that. But he has an illustrious career in business before, and he graduated top of his class at the United States Military Academy at West Point. And after that served in a patrol unit in the Iron Curtain. Pompeo went on to graduate from law school from Harvard Law and has spent 2 decades in business after that. I want to also ask him take a pause from our topic of school choice, given everything that's been happening in Afghanistan and the President's recent remarks, to maybe say a couple comments on that. Mike, come on out.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming out. David mentioned that the President just spoke about Afghanistan, and I know we're here to talk about education and freedom and the connectivity between those two and how important that is, but it's worth taking just a moment to talk about freedom and what's happened in these past weeks in Afghanistan. I worked tirelessly on behalf of you and on behalf of President Trump to deliver a path forward where we could get our young men and women home from Afghanistan, but to do so in a way that was consistent with American values, with our history and our tradition, to make sure that we got every American out, all of our equipment out, and that we did so in a way that was orderly and protected the United States from a future attack that might come from that place. Unfortunately, this administration made a different choice. It picked an arbitrary political date, originally September 11th. We all know the significance of that date, now just a handful of days from the 20th anniversary of that tragedy. They made a political arbitrary decision to set a date certain. They departed from the major airfield. They never made a plan to make sure we got all the Americans home. And the end result was chaos that ended up resulting in the death of 13 amazing American young people. We know that those soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines who served in Afghanistan these past 20 years did noble service on behalf of the United States. They kept us all here in New Hampshire, in my home state of Kansas. They kept us all safe. We should thank every veteran who served in that place for the work that they did to keep us safe. And we should make sure, as we think about our leaders for the future, that they are leaders who are determined to protect American interests. And when we do that, when we set political arbitrary dates and put people at risk, this is a mistake that America can ill afford. Turning to today's topic, you may think it's odd that the former Secretary of State is here with you. But I must say, I have a son who's a little bit older now. I taught 5th grade Sunday school, so I consider myself an educator. Not really, Betsy. Although I must say, being a 5th grade Sunday school teacher is the best preparation for being the Secretary of State you can possibly imagine. As I traveled the world, I watched a lot of bad actors. There is nothing. There was no threat. Not the Chinese Communist Party, not Vladimir Putin, not the time I spent with Chairman Kim in North Korea. There is nothing that is more likely to undermine our way of life here in the United States than our failure to educate the next generation. It's not a close call. It's not a close call, and we are on the cusp of losing it. Here's the simple task, and we'll talk about this. The simple task is this. We know the kinds of things our kids should be taught, and we know who should make those decisions. It's the children's parents and their families. They should have the capacity to make good decisions for their own kids, the things they want them to learn. This is why freedom, school choice is such an absolute imperative. We want to make sure that these young people learn real American history, the noble founding of this exceptional country. It is absolutely imperative. We want to make sure too, we want to make sure they can read and write and do math. Right? These are the things that our teachers for so many years have taught, and today we've walked so far away from with the junk that's being brought into the classroom today. We know too that schools are places where character and civil institutions are built. So we need our schools to reflect that understanding that our founders brought to us here. If we get those things right, if we teach real American history, if we make sure that our kids are learning the character traits that will lead them to be able to good, productive life, then we have a real opportunity. This will continue to be the greatest nation in history for the next 250 years when my grandkids and hopefully my great-grandkids are here. Thank you for being here and sharing your concerns about America's educational system. Betsy, I look forward to our conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mike. Now, the next person I want to introduce is Chris Wilson. Chris is a nationally renowned pollster who has directed research for public research firms and presidential candidates and everything in between. He's a regular political analyst on both Fox News and MSNBC. I'm surprised they let him on. Chris is brilliant. We asked him to talk to parents, experts, and Americans across the country and elicit from them what it is they care about in education and school choice, and then share that data that he's gathered with us. The great thing about Chris is that he lets the facts speak for the argument rather than make up the argument and fit the facts into that. So without further ado, let me give you Chris Wilson.
Well, so I interrupt your regularly scheduled forum to present some polling data. And I'm sure everybody got up this morning excited to see a bunch of polling charts. David gave me two instructions for today, two directives. One is stay under 10 minutes, so everybody can stay here. And two, try my best not to put everybody to sleep. So I'll do that for you. I do want to talk about the extensiveness of this study, though, because it's probably one of the most thorough academic and research programs I've ever been a part of. We talked to, and you see up here, if you can read that, thousands of Americans to look at what their attitudes were on the issue of school freedom. The second thing we did, though, that's not listed here is before we started, as David mentioned, we talked to a lot of experts, subject matter experts, and then we also did some online studies in which we collected millions, literally millions of impressions to arrive at the conclusions that I'll present to you today. The first one I'll say is probably intuitive to most of you in this room, is that the COVID-19 pandemic created a tremendous opportunity to foster school choice around the country. Second is, over the last 6 years, opinions have shifted in favor of school choice, school freedom, when respondents particularly learn what it is. Third, though, I'm in the unenviable position of being at a school choice forum and informing people that the word school choice actually creates negative reactions in a large majority of Americans who are currently supportive of the overall elements of the program, but not the terminology itself. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But the conclusion beyond that is that branding, therefore, needs a new look. And I'll talk about how we arrived at that new look here in a moment. A new effort that has the features of school choice, supportive messaging, and brings school choice to students and parents across the country. So the first part is talking about satisfaction, what's happened just before and after COVID-19. And what you see there is, on the left is overall satisfaction, and then its growth since COVID-19. You can see the number of people satisfied has decreased by 12 points. The number of people dissatisfied has increased by 11 for a 23-point movement overall just in the course of the last year and a half, 2 years, specific to this issue. I can think of no other issue that has seen that tectonic of a shift in such a short period of time. This shows it going back to 2015, just as I thought I didn't want anyone to say, oh, you just showed the last year. Well, what's happened over a while? And if you look at the red there, this is on the issue of school choice, utilizing that terminology, by the way, support, oppose. So I won't go through each one of the numbers individually, but as you can see, the green line kind of goes up a little bit, the red line goes up a little bit, and I'll talk about why that is. But the fact is this has been developing for some time, and a little bit of dissatisfaction with education in general. So this is the terminology. And to arrive at this terminology, we use something called a discrete choice, kind of a conjoint analysis for anyone who is a stats geek like me. And what this methodology is used for is, to give you an example, if you were testing a product to sell, let's say hypothetically a television, you would test attributes of that television. Maybe you'd test the price. Maybe you'd test the built-in operating system. Maybe you'd test the screen itself. And then within that screen, you would test parts of the screen. Maybe it's at LCD, is it 4K, is it 8K, is it LED, is it plasma? That is what you arrive at. What are the components within the product that cause someone to buy one television over another? So what we did is we looked at multiple terms, and those terms were then randomized. So any of those words could have ended up with the other words. And what you see is, utilizing this methodology, which I've used for multiple Fortune 500 companies for the purposes of selling products, we found that the word school freedom causes people to be more supportive of the overall program. And as I said at the outset, I'm in the unenviable position of being a school choice forum to show that the terminology that has the least movement, in fact has a negative effect on the movement, is actually the terms school choice and parental choice. Now, that's not because there's something nefarious or arbitrary about those terms. It's because they've been used by opponents of school choice and because they've been targeted toward other aspects of the program, negative aspects, to create those ideas. And so my point today is, and I'll spend a little more time on it, is school freedom as a program and school choice scholarships as a component of that program are the best ways to talk about what it is that we're all here today to advocate for. I also want to show just some simple percentages rather than show some statistical tests. If you look at, and what I do here is I break it into just urban and non-urban, the term school freedom works in both urban and non-urban areas, and it works better than anything else. And those are the top 5 that I showed you on the previous slide. So there's several names and labels that work that elicit support, but there's no question that school freedom is the one that elicits the most support. Then from there we go into features. Remember I said you've got, if you think about my TV analogy earlier, the screen is what works best. Well, what is the component of the screen that causes people to support it? And so we've tested some different features, some different messages that work there. And here I break it down by party, and I won't read them all off to you because I know this is being made available, but I will just say overall, the top feature is an access to a good education should be something that everybody can enjoy, not just a select few. That works with everyone overall. It works with Democrats. It works with independents. Interestingly enough, with Republicans right now, the top issue was actually CRT, but I'll show you whereas that works with Republicans. It doesn't necessarily work with everybody else. So then we go into region. I showed you party first, suburban, urban, rural. What's fascinating to me as a researcher in this situation is you find different messages working with each one. In the urban areas, same message. Access to good education works for everyone. In urban areas, schools will better invest in students rather than the product of the current system. They're a little bit frustrated with their schools. They want to know that their student is going to be the one invested in and not necessarily the school itself. And then third, the rural areas have actually, you've seen great amounts of movement and attitudes because of COVID-19. And what it showed them is they don't necessarily have to accept only what their local school has. It gives them access to other types of education, maybe through Zoom or other programs. And then the messaging. And this is we go through the features, then to the specific messaging. Again, won't read everything off, but here I break Republicans and Democrats into urban and non-urban. And it's fascinating to me when you look at the urban areas, the best message with Democrats, school freedom will lead to more diverse educational options in public schools, allowing students to access the classes that help them grow. That's what school choice is, right? But the term freedom is what pushes it. And then with independence, school freedom lets parents decide where their children's education go. I mean, that's probably been the greatest movement we've seen happen in the 2021 legislative cycles. Here I break it down by race, just I think, again, looking at the urban messages. When you look at with whites overall, school freedom causes schools to compete for tax dollars. With African Americans, school freedom will cut barriers to effective education. And then with Hispanics, school freedom will personalize education for disadvantaged students. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is who's at fault. Because one of the things we want to look at is because attitudes toward education have decreased, who is it that people see as at fault? Well, if you look at the green, that's who Americans see as being the fault for education decreasing overall. Politicians and union bosses. They don't see it about teachers' unions today, probably a surprise to many people. Even though we saw a lot of blow-ups on school boards, they don't see it about school boards. I would say the one exception is, interestingly enough, in urban areas, they do see it to be about inadequate teachers, but really most people do not. Even Republicans don't. It comes down to politicians, union bosses, and bureaucrats. And then I want to talk a little bit about, who is it not, what not to say when you get into these situations. I think it's important to know what to say, what words work, what words don't work. And overall, you don't want to make it about inadequate teachers, don't want to make it about unions. And the thing that we found nationally, and I point this out in a room full of people who are probably as frustrated about CRT as I am, CRT does not work with anyone beside Republicans. It's an interesting aspect is that we look at as we move into general elections this year right now in Virginia and New Jersey, and we look at Republican primaries and Democrat primaries starting up around the country, this is becoming a major issue. But having said that, it works in primaries, not in generals. And I kind of tend to think of everything in political. It's probably a failing on my part. So, in conclusion, I want to go through again. First of all, no question that the last 24 months have diminished parental satisfaction in children's education. Second point is where school choice warriors have kept the battle steady, building support nationwide, those first 2 slides I showed you, educational choice opponents have been successfully branded school choice as a term that really doesn't mean anything more than vouchers. It's kind of the same thing. If you support vouchers, you probably support school choice, but if you don't support vouchers, you don't support school choice. Whenever there's differences between the two, there are nuances. So school freedom is the way forward. The issue requires a rebrand, and as I pointed out to David, probably starting with a lot of our materials here, but it's that's where we start. And the public does not necessarily blame, they don't blame teachers for what's going on, even inadequate ones. They don't blame teachers' unions. And CRT is effective amongst Republicans, but no one else. And I think it's an important thing to point out. And the features and messaging vary by location and demographic. And that's why I showed you those slides that were in those graphs, or those tables, because I think it's important to know there's no pluralistic message that works overall, but a feature of access is strongest amongst the different groups. But no one single message is a silver bullet. It kind of requires understanding who you're speaking to and where you're speaking. So with that, I'll hand it back over to David, and I appreciate, it doesn't look like anyone fell asleep, so at least one, that's okay.
And so now I wanted to ask Betsy to introduce a little film that we had for you, because it was her idea, her team's idea, that we get and interview people who would have been affected by it.
So we're going to be talking about school freedom all got potential in me before I even realized that I was capable of accomplishing any of this.
When she went from thinking she was less than, now knowing that she's just as good, is something I'll never forget. It's been one of the best journeys and choices we've made as parents.
Every single day, he was the first one ready for school. He asked his teachers every single day, "Can I have more homework?" I love to do my homework. And he would come home from school and sit down as soon as he changed his clothes. And my husband and I were like, he loves learning.
I have a great life, good joys of my dreams come true.
There are kids, boy, brilliant, with tremendous potential, who are trapped in really bad education environments.
They have no other choice. We really need people who have creative solutions, like charter schools, to have the power that they need to make good things happen.
I feel a desire for this program to reach more families and more children across the nation.
I feel that it's sad that not all kids have that option. The youth are our future, and we want to build them up, not keep them down.
You know, I don't think any kid should experience trauma, and especially trauma in school. Every life, every moment that we wait to change monopoly is a life cost. And every year, every moment, a child is feeling like they can't achieve, they're not enough. So when I think about those students who are trapped in these schools that don't hold them to high expectations, they deserve the choice. Those are the students that I really have a passion for, because that's how I grew up.
Every child deserves a right to be educated in a setting that is best for them. If I don't help, then who's going to help them? If you don't help, then who's going to help them? I said to him, I said, "Oh my goodness, you have been invited to speak to the President of the United States about your story, and it's going to help so many other children." And he says, "Okay, but it can't be on Tuesday. It can't be on Tuesday." And so I talked to them, and we were going to go on Monday. And all of a sudden, our flight was going to come back on Tuesday. And Sam said, oh my goodness. Tell them thank you so much for inviting me. That I was so happy. I work on Tuesday, and they're counting on me. And I said, Samuel, this is the President of the United States. This is one of the most important people in the world. And he says, I know, and I'm so grateful. But Mom, I can't cancel my work. And I said, Samuel, this is a 4-hour. You do a great job. He said, but I don't want to let them down. Really proud of you for that, because I think that if we all approach life in that manner, they're counting on me. So much more will get done for everyone.
So I am from Jacksonville, Florida, and
Tears in my eyes.
And Law, I'm trying to appreciate that testimony from some really awesome people. Many of them have become my personal friends. Thanks so much for being here today. Really appreciate it. Really interested in talking with you about this topic. So you're a West Point grad. You served in the military for 5 years. Small business owner. Served in Congress. Headed the CIA. Took our nation's top diplomacy job as Secretary of State. You have a unique perspective on how students are prepared to take on college, to enter the workforce, or to serve their country in various ways. So, very easy first question. Why do you think school choice is important?
First of all, we all should work on Tuesdays. What a lovely young, graceful love. That was glorious. We know so often that there are families who look at where the students are at school and they're just not satisfactory. But they want something that is unique and special for their kids, whether it's a special ed student or someone who just has a special love. But they're trapped in a place where they can't get out and they can't get the education they need. There are very few places in the American economy where monopolies dominate and where people are restricted in the products they can choose. Parents should have the ability to choose the product they want to choose for their child. And that can change over time. Our son attended private school in his early years. He went to a big public high school. It worked for our son. Every parent will make a different set of choices. But it's so important. It's so important on the individual level for those kids to come out of school with confidence and the power of the knowledge that they've gained. You should know too, we are competing all around the world. We want to make sure our children are raised up with the character and values and intellect that they need to compete on the global stage so they can create jobs and raise their families too. The ability to have freedom for students and their families to make good decisions about the school will improve the quality of life, not just for those students, but for all of us.
Thank you. So this year has been a banner year thus far for school choice, for school freedom. 21 states have expanded or improved or started new programs, in part due to school closures and mask mandates and all the things associated with the last year and a half of COVID. So talk about the impact you think that the shutdowns driven by the unions and the establishment have had on the expansion of school freedom, school choice.
Well, this became politics, not science, and parents can smell it. Traveling, I've watched parents. They are angry about what school systems did to their children, and so whether it was the union bosses or the school boards, they denied their students the opportunity to learn, sometimes for a year, sometimes for even longer, in an environment where they could truly absorb the information they needed to move from 3rd grade to 4th grade, to move from middle school into high school. They were going to be unprepared for that. You only get 12 years, right? And they took 8% or 12% of that away from these young people. It also, I think, gave a lot of parents a lot of insight. You saw some of this testimony in the film by parents who were teaching their kids at home and then had to go back to work. And in this case, we had parents who were at home and hadn't been home before. They got a chance to see these curriculum. They got to see it wasn't meeting their students' needs in the ways that it was often that classroom where maybe they dropped them off in the morning or picked them up in the afternoon. They got a chance to really see the substance of what was being presented to their children. And there's nothing like a mama bear who's not happy. There were a lot of unhappy mama bears. And I think that's fantastic because that'll make them more ambitious, more empowered. We see what happened here in New Hampshire. Notice some of the state legislators who made that happen here in New Hampshire, who empowered students here in this state. God bless you for doing that. You will make New Hampshire better, and every one of those students who has access to that program will give parents that freedom to make good choices for their kids.
You're absolutely right, and parents had a window like never before in their kids' education, and many of them are displeased. We also know that over 1 million kids didn't do any learning at all, like never participated in the distance learning, and over 11 million that were in some way at a huge deficit. That's over 20% of the kids in the public schools. So this has been a really challenging year for kids across the country. And you've talked about how the curriculum decisions may be influencing how parents and Americans are viewing education today. Anything additional you want to add to that, or Dave, you want to chime in at all?
What we saw in a lot of Chris's polling is the attitude of the parents when they got frustrated was, I want something different, I want something new. And so among parents who had children in K through 12, the support for school choice, Democrat, Republican, Independent, is at 80%. 80% of them want to have more impact on the decisions the schools are making, more authority over what's happening. And I think school choice education freedom programs will empower those parents And together, they will be able to make sure the schools provide that good education. That's been the most remarkable thing that I think we saw in the data was that increase of support, something that many of you, I know, have worked on for years, for decades, because we knew it, we believed it, and now the American people, certainly those who have students in school, they're seeing the light, and they're going to, I think it gives us an opportunity to move forward on that.
Can I say one more thing? I don't know who the other 20% are who want less choice, right? I find it remarkable that a parent would say, no, I don't want to, whatever the school provides to my child, I don't want any option, right? I want my child to be locked into the system, which could be good 1 year and maybe not fit their student 2 years later. I think Americans appreciate freedom and the opportunity to make decisions for their families, and this is what we're saying.
So Mike, when we served together, I worked hard with President Trump on introducing a policy initiative called Education Freedom Scholarships. And it would be the most transformative and significant investment in kids from the federal level. So EFS, for those not familiar, is a tax credit to bolster state-driven initiatives. So states would choose to participate or not, but it would really provide rocket fuel to efforts already going on in states. And once it's law, and I say once it is law because I think it's inevitable, it's only a matter of if, not when, not if, it will really significantly impact millions of kids' lives. So do you believe the next administration in Congress should pass a bill like EFS?
Yeah, I actually think, look, I was working in a different space from this, but I know this legislation, and I know exactly, you talked about the rocket fuel, I know precisely what it was designed to do. You should know it was great in two ways. One, it wasn't Washington driven, right? If you think you're going to hand this over to the folks in the Washington, Betsy can't say this, I can say this. That Department of Education and those career professionals there think this is an attack on them. They have a power base that they want to keep control of. I want the lovely people of New Hampshire to make good decisions through their state elected officials, their school boards, their state representatives, their state elected officials, to make good decisions for their kids. And this piece of legislation did exactly that. It then provided federal resources tied to the good decisions made at the state and local level to bolster that, to provide emphatic support for the capacity for parents to make good decisions for their kids. This is a fundamentally libertarian, liberty-based, freedom-loving idea. I hope that we will find a federal legislator that's willing to do it. I'm not sure we quite have the right one just yet, but we are only 14 months away from the next swing of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me comment on that a little bit, because you all in the Trump administration also put forward an idea during the COVID relief package that the additional money that was going to schools should be directed through the parents and let them choose to their public schools, that's where their children go, or to private schools, or to homeschooling. And when you start thinking about directing the public money for schools, then school choice or school freedom becomes also freedom for the public school students as well. They will have much more direct authority over a school board or a bureaucrat or an administrator if the administrator has to go to that parent and say, well, we need you to check off that we get the COVID money. Please send that and your child to our school. It's a tremendously empowering proposal. Somebody in the Senate went ahead in the new Congress, the Democrat Congress with President Biden, to offer that as an amendment. And it failed by one vote, very on partisan lines. But what we're seeing is more and more awareness that, hey, if we direct the money through the parents, that's a way to accomplish school freedom.
That's right. No, absolutely. I like to often talk about the metaphor of a kid with a backpack going to school with the things they need every day, and having those resources attached to that backpack to find the right fit for them. So let's switch topics just a little bit and talk a little bit about American students' standing in the world. So PISA is an international test that tests students from all countries, all participating countries around the world. It's showing that American American students are badly lagging in reading and in math and in science. The last data from the PISA tests were from 2018, before the pandemic. So we have a chart up on the screen here that shows the mean science, reading, and math scores. It also shows we're ranked 22nd, beaten out by many of our economic competitors. We are also, specifically in math, 4 years behind our counterparts in China. And that's shown here on this chart. So how do you think that impacts our long-term economic competitiveness, and what are the implications of this?
So there's near-term challenges and then real long-term implications for the country. The near-term challenge is that the best and brightest workers from abroad will want to come here, and our businesses will want to hire them. That's great because we want our businesses to be successful. What we'd really like them to do is work with the kids that are raised and educated here in the United States, but they've got to, right, if they're going to compete in the market space where they're selling products all around the world, they've got to have the intellectual talent to go deliver that. So there's a short-term challenge. The longer-term challenge is this will put America in a second or third tier with respect to our innovation and capacity to deliver. And we haven't been in that place in American history before. And so you can see this. This is a long-term trend. This has been going on for a while. One of the reasons for this is almost certainly the absence of competition in our school spaces. When you have a monopoly, when you can teach the kids the things that you want to teach them and then choose not to teach them the things you don't, there's no incentive for you to teach them the things that they will need and that their parents want them taught. This is the central conundrum and why school freedom makes so much sense. You know, I'm reminded too, my sister is a teacher in public school. Her husband, my brother-in-law, is also a teacher. She's a very talented lady. There were a lot of things. I'm confident that given freedom to actually create a curriculum and grow the kids that were in her pod or her space, she would have been all over, but she too was restricted. So this doesn't fall to those teachers, right? The fact that our kids are behind on an international stage doesn't fall to the great people who have chosen a career to educate our next generation. It falls to this bureaucracy and the union leaders who sit on top of that, who want stasis and the status quo and aren't prepared to meet today's challenges when you see other countries around the world who have managed to confront those challenges of today.
That's absolutely right. And thinking about teachers and the central figures they are in this equation, more freedom gives teachers ultimately more freedom to teach as they need and want to. Yeah. So are you concerned also about our ability from a military and counterintelligence perspective vis-a-vis Russia and China and now most recently the Taliban?
I'm worried about a lot of things. For 4 years I was paid to be all of that. It is absolutely the case that we have been able to, for the last, oh goodness, at least since World War II, to provide our intelligence operators and our military, our service members, the finest equipment in the world. They had the tanks that could shoot the farthest and the best. We had the best ability to see the battlefield. Our pilots had the best equipment, the best technology underneath them. Indeed, countries from all across the world wanted to buy American equipment with American intellectual property inside of that. To the extent we lose this, to the extent we don't have the best scientists, American scientists, kids raised in America, and we don't have the best physicists and mathematicians to deliver this, and the people who understand semiconductor technology, in the absence of not only to have the best, but to have them at scale with real volume to deliver these complex components to our fighting forces, then we do absolutely run the risk that the next time we have to send our young men and women into harm's way, they will be doing so with equipment that doesn't meet the world standard and doesn't meet that which is in the hands of their adversaries. This would be unconscionable to do to those young people who have decided to serve America in uniform.
Let's zoom in a little bit on our own students' preparedness to advance from grade to grade and then continue into the workforce or college. We see the achievement gap continuing to widen between the highest performing students and our most vulnerable, lower performing students. Examples from the NAEP, the Nation's Report Card, are from 2019, the most recent data we have, and I focused here on fourth graders. the achievement gap between the highest and lowest performers has widened. And this is after over $1 trillion spent since the Department of Education was in existence, specifically to close the achievement gap. So you can see from this chart that the students in the bottom 10% are actually doing worse than they were a decade ago. You were a soldier, a West Point cadet. Nearly a third of students who want to enlist can't pass the academic portion of the entry exam for the military. Is education failure also a national security issue? Failure?
It is. We talked about that for a minute too. This gap is real. You should know that, in my view, the gap is at least in part because of the complete absence of freedom of choice for schools. So kids that come from parents that have resources can often make choices about their children, right? They can, one of the parents can stay home, they can send their kids to a school that teaches their children what it is they want them to learn. If their kid's especially talented in drama or math or whatever it may be, they can get their child to the right place. What New Hampshire has done and what we are advocating for here today is to give those other parents, those parents who don't have all of those options, the same opportunity, the same chance. Why would we give parents with means the capacity for school freedom, but not give every parent that same capacity to make that choice? Woo! It's the morally right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. It's the important thing to do for the country as well, to raise up not just a handful, but the many. Right? There are 300+ million of us today. We need to make sure that not just my son, not just your kids, not just your children, but every child has this opportunity to go to a place that's going to prepare them for the workforce, prepare them for higher education, and prepare them for whatever it is that they choose to do in their lives.
Let's talk a little bit again about the role of the federal government versus the states in education. As I mentioned a moment ago, more than $1 trillion has been spent at the federal level specifically to close these achievement gaps, and it hasn't worked. In your view, why hasn't that top-down approach worked?
Betsy, I may turn this back on you. I have one thought, but I get your take. You had a chance to see this up close and personal running that department. I'm in a different department. There's a big bureaucracy too. My sense is that if you try to do this at the national level, you just can't appreciate all the variability, all the nuance, and all the different conditions. I think about my home state. So in the western part of our state, a big city would have 500 people. And a community might have one high school that would manage to have 600 kids. And you go to Wichita, where I'm from, or you go to the Kansas City area, and you'd have a much more urban environment. Very different situations. Culturally, very different places as well. It is not possible for folks in Washington, D.C., the bureaucrats in the Department of Education to take on all that variability. It is possible for the school board in Comanche County, Kansas, or in Kiowa County, Kansas, or in Johnson County in the eastern part of the district, the urban part of our state. It's possible for them to get it right. So that's my sense. My sense is it's not necessarily that the federal folks are bad people or that they're not trying. It's that to capture what's really going on and to understand what the students really need, you need to empower parents and families and disempower bureaucrats in Washington.
So, one of the things that I proposed was block granting the federal funds to the states and local districts. If you were back in Washington in a leadership role, would you commit to limiting the role of the federal government in education, and how would you envision going about that?
This has been a long-standing conservative idea. Sign me up. Look, I only lived in Washington 10 years. Forgive me. The truth is, there are resources that come from Washington to protect us and keep us secure, and that is the appropriate place for that to be. National defense matters. When we get to the things that impact communities and schools and families, those are best left to local communities to make good decisions about. So whether it is block grants for education, I would say the same thing in how we think about delivering health care, all the things that really impact families and lives every day. It's such a complex country with such, right, from places like Alaska to places like here, just very different environments. To try and drive those with a uniform national standard, it's just a task too big. And so yes, sign me up. We should drive this money down. If the money's been collected through federal taxation, to disperse it in a way, block grants as a model for this, which gives the decision-making authority to either state or local government. I think we will see a qualitative improvement in the capacity to educate our children and more chances for freedom of education for those same kids.
Betsy, I'm a big fan of block granting, get the decision-making out of Washington, although my heart would say let's block grant it to the parents and let each one of them decide where that money should go in their school system or their private schools. Just take the government out of it, right to them, and then let it go back to the schools.
Absolutely. Well, we talked about the fact that school choice, school freedom enjoys broad bipartisan support, and it's grown exponentially in this year. One of the rare value-added investments the federal government makes in education is the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program. And I know that you fought hard in Congress to save it during the Obama administration. It's under attack now in the Biden administration. But even a liberal like Dianne Feinstein supports this program. So talk to us about why you supported that program over the years and what should be done to protect it.
So these kids that are impacted by this are some of the kids who live in the most difficult places, some of the most difficult communities in our country. Every state has them, or nearly every state has places like this. But this particular fund was put in place. It was put in place on a bipartisan basis. It wasn't political. School freedom should not be remotely political. And it was working. And there were happy families, and there was enormous demand. There was more demand than there was supply for these particular scholarships. And then it became all messed up in union politics, is my best guess. I watched Democrats start to walk away from this commitment to these kids who were in difficult conditions, some of whom didn't have parents around to help them make these good choices. But all of them had people that were loving and wanted them to do better. And I, for the life of me, could never figure out why there was so much opposition, other than to say that there were folks inside the unions that felt threatened by it.
Well, it should be noted also that Washington, D.C. is the only place where the federal government actually does have a role in education because of the unique nature of the district. And thank you for your championing that continued important program.
It's a very important program. If you want to see more about how that program, there's a movie dramatizing it, Miss Virginia. It does an excellent job of showing how some parents really hung in there and rose up and worked with the politicians to get it passed.
To save it, yes.
That's right. It's a great movie. So we know that school choice, school freedom is a political winner. Governors Ducey and DeSantis were both beneficiaries of their support for their programs in their respective states, and they won because a lot of Democrats who support school choice voted for them, including a lot of minority and female voters that may not have otherwise supported them. So do you think conservatives should be leaning into this issue more?
You know, I worked on this a long time ago now, before I lost my mind and ran for Congress. Yes, it was the Kansas group that I was part of. We were working on building this up in Kansas. We had a good-sized homeschool organizations inside of Kansas, but we didn't have very good charter school laws. So the freedom for students to get outside of the government monopoly schools wasn't widely available for Kansas students. And what I could see was that it was in the finest conservative tradition to give this power to those families. So I hope we'll see everybody across the political spectrum recognize that it's not just politically useful, it is important for those young people.
Well, we're coming close to the end of our time, but I do have a last question here. And you know, we're in the heart of back to school season. We're seeing a lot of activities around schools in all of our communities. So what is your message to parents and students across the country as they go back to school?
So, you know, It reminds me of what I used to tell my son. If he was here, he'd say, stop, I can finish this sentence. I would tell my son lots of things, but most importantly, work hard, tell the truth, and keep your faith. And I think that applies to these young people headed back to school. Be a voracious learner. Make sure you're in a place where learning is rewarded and you're learning the things that your family and your parents want you to learn. Work hard at this. Keep your faith. Understand who you are. Be centered in the things that you know to be important. And then we leaders, parents, people who can involve, can set the course, school board members, city council members, state elected officials, we have the responsibility to reward those young people who make those choices, to work hard and to keep the faith and to tell the truth. If they do those things, we have an obligation to them. And I hope this is a school year filled with your kids back in school, in the classroom, getting to learn all the things they learn, reading, writing, all that good stuff, being around their peers, engaged in all the things that we learn in these social environments as well. It's very important to get our kids back into the classroom and that we have schools that parents love and want their kids to be a part of.
Thanks for the great
Thank you, Betsy.
conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy and Mike. Thank you very much. As you were talking about your question to Mike, should leaders be talking more about this and supporting it, I want to actually turn around and ask our guests here in the audience. You all are from New Hampshire. You know, at least every 4 years, you see a lot of politicians who come and go. Maybe by a round of applause, would you like them to talk more about school freedom when they come to church? That's great, because in order to promote and encourage and pass school choice and school freedom bills, we're going to need an army of grassroots folks. We're going to need leaders who will step up, regardless of party, and do what's right for the children. So I appreciate you all coming here, but join that army. I think in your bulletin there's some paper you can fill out if you want to be in contact with what we're going to be doing around the country. But let me just ask Betsy or Mike, would you like to make any closing remark? Any last remarks?
Well, David, I just, again, thank you and the Club for Growth for this opportunity to talk about this important issue and in a way that is really forward-leaning. And I think that, you know, we have such good ideas that are proven in states across the country. We need to continue to build on those and really to support children and their families to find that right fit for them, because we know that it is critical to the future of our country to ensure that every single child has the opportunity to fully develop themselves and their gifts and talents. And so, again, thank you for this opportunity. And for Mike, thank you so much for your commitment to this issue and to really expanding opportunity for kids.
I just didn't state, Betsy, thanks for giving me this opportunity. Thank you all for being here. This is an important issue for the next generation. You all took time to come here on this afternoon to be here with us to talk about this and be part of this. Thank you for that. Thank you to New Hampshire for be heading down this path in a steadfast, serious way. It's incredibly important. You lead the nation in so many ways. Keep driving hard. Make sure you hold your elected officials accountable to get this right here in New Hampshire. We'll do our part to make sure that other states do it as well.
Back up the governor.
Thank you all very much.